The sun was a cruel jewel in the vast Mexican sky, baking the white walls of the hacienda into blinding sheets of light. Inside the cool, dark house, a different kind of heat was building. Dona Maria Luisa stood before her father, her hands, soft and unused to work, clenched at the sides of her fine silk dress. The dress was beautiful, blue like a morning glory, but it pulled tight across her chest and stomach. A fact her father's eyes noted with a familiar flicker of disgust. "You will accept him," her father said, his voice low and final. "He is a man of standing. His vineyards are the envy of the region." "His standing is built on the backs of broken men," Maria Luisa replied, her own voice surprisingly steady. "And his temper is a secret to no one. He struck his last servant so hard, the man lost his hearing. I will not be his wife." Her father's face, usually a mask of cold control, flushed a deep red. He took a step closer, and she could smell the brandy on his breath. "You speak of temper? Look at yourself. You are a gluttonous stain on this family's name. You eat your shame with every bite, and you dare to defy me? You have no prospects, no future. You are an embarrassment wrapped in silk." The words were not new. They were the wallpaper of her life, a constant whisper in every room. Her body, large and soft where her sisters were slender and delicate, was her crime. Her love of books, her quiet observations, her very presence, was an offense to him. But today, something had snapped. The thought of being handed over to that cruel man, to be another possession, to be bruised and dominated, was worse than any insult. "I would rather be a beggar in the streets than his bride," she said, looking him directly in the eye. For a moment there was silence. Then a terrible, cold smile spread across her father's face. It was a smile that drained the courage from her bones. "A beggar? No, that is too kind. If you are so repulsed by civilized company, perhaps you belong with the beasts." The next few days were a blur of silence and dread. She was locked in her room. Her books were taken. Meals were scraps. She heard the comings and goings of men with rough voices, speaking in short, sharp bursts. Then the day came. Two of her father's ranch hands, their eyes avoiding hers, guided her not to the chapel, but to the stable yard. A group of men waited there, and her heart froze. They were Apache scouts. She had seen them before, at a distance, working with the Mexican army. They were lean and tough as desert timber, their faces impassive. Her father stood with their leader, a man who seemed carved from bronze. He was not the tallest, but he carried a stillness that commanded the yard. His hair was long and black, tied back, and his eyes were like dark flint. Her father spoke loudly for all to hear. "You see my burden? She is lazy, disobedient, and worthless. A beast of appetite. Take her. Let the desert have her. It is more than she deserves." He then tossed a small, heavy bag of coins to the Apache leader. The sound of the gold was the loudest thing Maria Luisa had ever heard. The leader, the one called Kayeshchi, caught the bag without a word. He looked at her father, then his dark eyes moved to her. She expected to see contempt or greed or brutality, but his face showed nothing. It was like looking at a deep, still pool. Her father turned to her one last time. "You chose this. Remember that." Then he walked back into the house, and the great wooden door slammed shut. The sound was the end of her world. One of the scouts roughly tied her hands with a coarse rope. The hemp bit into her soft wrists. She was led to a scrawny, tired-looking horse and told to mount. She struggled, her dress tearing, her body clumsy with fear and humiliation. None of the men moved to help. Finally, she hauled herself up, her face burning. The small party moved out, past the boundary of the hacienda, into the scrubland beyond. They rode for hours. The sun beat down. Her fine dress was soaked with sweat and dust. The landscape changed from scrub to rocky hills, harsh and unforgiving. As the light began to fade, Kaeshji called a halt near a thin stream. The men dismounted and began making camp with easy efficiency. Maria Luisa simply sat on the horse, exhausted, her spirit shattered. She was a piece of trash, discarded in the wilderness. Kaeshji walked over to her horse. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Then he drew a knife from his belt. She flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the cut. Instead, she felt a sharp tug at her wrists, and the painful pressure of the ropes fell away. She opened her eyes. He had cut her bonds. He pointed to the stream, then to a flat rock nearby. His meaning was clear. Get down, drink, sit. She slid off the horse, her legs buckling under her. She stumbled to the stream and drank the warm, earthy water like it was the last she would ever taste. Then she sat on the rock, watching them. They spoke little. They shared a pouch of dried meat and a flat bread. After a while, Kaeshji walked over. He held out a piece of the meat and a strip of the bread. Maria Luisa stared at it. Was this a trick? A final meal? Her stomach growled, betraying her. Slowly, she reached out and took it. She ate. It was tough and salty, but it was food. He watched her, then nodded once, a small, almost invisible motion. He filled a cup from the stream and placed it beside her before walking back to his men. That night, as the cold desert air crept in, she lay on the hard ground, wrapped only in her torn silk. She shivered, listening to the strange sounds of the desert. She saw Kaeshji sitting by the low fire, his profile sharp against the flames. He was not looking at her with the leering interest she feared, nor with her father's disgust. He looked at her as one might look at a strange bird that had landed in camp with a detached, quiet curiosity. The terror was still a knot in her stomach, but around it, a tiny, bewildering thread of something else began to form. It was the faint, impossible sense that in this man's silent eyes, she was not a burden. She was simply a problem that had not yet been solved. The morning sun was a slap. It woke Maria Luisa from a thin, troubled sleep. For a moment, she was confused by the hard ground and the wide, empty sky. Then the memory rushed back, her father's cold smile, the rough rope, the silent warrior. She sat up, her body stiff and aching in places she didn't know could ache. The Apache men were already moving, rolling their blankets, kicking dirt over the dead fire. Their movements were quick and sure, with no wasted energy. Kaeshji stood by the horses. He glanced at her and made a sharp gesture with his hand. Up. The day's journey was beginning. They rode. The land grew rougher, the path steeper. Her horse, a bony creature, struggled on the rocky incline. Maria Luisa clung to the saddle, her knuckles white. She was not a skilled rider. At the hacienda, riding was a leisurely activity, done on gentle paths. This was different. This was a climb. The sun beat on her back, and her torn dress caught on thorny bush. She felt like a great, clumsy doll, jostled and helpless. After a few hours, they came to a steep, rocky slope. The men ahead guided their horses up with ease, the animals picking their way between the stones. Her horse tried to follow, but its foot slipped on the loose scree. It stumbled badly, and Maria Luisa was thrown sideways. She landed with a heavy thud on the stony ground, the air rushing from her lungs in a pained gasp. The horse scrambled up and trotted a few feet away, shaking its head. For a moment, she just lay there, humiliated and breathless. The world spun. She heard the other men stop and look back. One of them said something short in their language, and another let out a low laugh. It wasn't a cruel sound, but it was the sound of men seeing the obvious. She was ill-suited for this. She was a hindrance. Then Kaeshi was there. He had dismounted and walked back down the slope. He stood over her, blocking the sun. He didn't offer his hand. He just looked from her to the horse, and back at the long, winding trail ahead. His dark eyes were calculating. She pushed herself up, her face burning, expecting a shout, a yank to her feet, something. He did none of those things. Instead, he turned and walked to a stand of young, flexible trees at the side of the path. He took his knife and with strong, efficient strokes cut down 2 long, straight saplings. He brought them back and laid them parallel on the ground. Then, from his own horse, he took a blanket of thick, woven wool and his coiled rope. Maria Luisa watched, bewildered, as he worked. He lashed the saplings to the sides of his own sturdy horse, just behind the saddle, creating 2 long poles that dragged on the ground. Then he spread the blanket between them, weaving the rope back and forth until it formed a sort of sling, a netted bed. He tested it with his hands, pulling hard on the knots. Finally, he walked over to her. He pointed to the strange contraption, then to her. His meaning was clear, but impossible. He wanted her to get in. She shook her head, backing up a step. "No," she whispered in Spanish. "I can walk." She didn't know if he understood. He simply waited. The other men watched, silent now. The truth was, she didn't know if she could walk. Not for long, not over this terrain. Her body was already exhausted. The look in his eyes wasn't one of pity, but of pure, practical logic. She was slowing them down. This was the solution. Shame washing over her in a hot wave, she hobbled to the travois. She had to get on her hands and knees to crawl onto the blanket sling. It was undignified, absurd. She felt like a sack of grain. When she was settled, lying on her back, he gave a low command to his horse and began to walk. The first few moments were terrifying. The world lurched beneath her. The poles groaned and scraped over the rocks. She gripped the ropes, her eyes wide, staring up at the vast blue sky. But then a rhythm began. The horse's steady walk, the gentle sway of the travois. It was not comfortable, but it was not painful. She was moving, and she was not falling. They traveled like that for the rest of the day. The sun moved across the sky. She watched it from her strange, mobile bed. The shame began to fade, replaced by a deep, weary wonder. He was pulling her. This fierce, silent man was using his own strength to carry her, the unwanted gift, across the desert. He did not look back at her. He simply walked, his back straight, his eyes on the horizon. When they stopped to rest by a small, muddy waterhole, he came over. He handed her the water skin. She drank deeply. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling small and foreign. He took the skin back. His eyes met hers for a brief moment. He gave a single, slow nod. That night, the cold was deeper. She shivered violently in her torn silk, curled into a ball on the ground. She heard movement, and then a shadow fell over her. Kaeshi dropped his own heavy blanket beside her. It was made of buffalo hide, warm and smelling of smoke and horse. Then he walked back to the fire. Wrapped in the surprising warmth, Maria Luisa watched the flames dance. She watched him. He was cleaning his knife, methodically, carefully. The firelight played on the sharp angles of his face. He was not handsome in the way of the men in her father's world. His face was hard, marked by sun and wind. But there was a stillness to him, a completeness. He was a man who belonged exactly where he was. A thought came to her, strange and quiet. Her father had given her away as an act of cruelty, to break her. This man, this Apache, was treating her brokenness not as a joke or a sin, but as a simple fact. A problem to be solved with poles and rope and a blanket. He had not spoken a word to her that she could understand. Yet, in his actions cutting the ropes, building the travois, giving the blanket, there was a kindness more solid than any pretty words she had ever heard Dot as she drifted to sleep. The sky was a breathtaking sweep of stars, more stars than she knew existed. One of the younger Apache men pointed to a cluster and spoke. Kayeshji looked up. He said a word, his voice low and rough. Then he glanced toward where she lay. He did not point, but he said another few words. She would never know, but he had told the young man, "See that bright group? Our people say that is the carrying stars. They gave strength to the first woman who walked a long journey when she was tired." He did not explain why he thought of that story just then. He simply returned to cleaning his knife, leaving her under a sky full of new, unnamed lights. The journey ended not with a grand entrance, but with a slow unveiling. The land dipped into a hidden valley, sheltered by high, rocky cliffs. From her place on the travois, Maria Louisa saw the camp appear in pieces. First, a thin column of smoke against the late afternoon sky. Then, the low, rounded shapes of wickiups, dwellings made of brush and hide, blending into the earth like natural growths. Dogs barked, and children's voices, sharp and clear, carried on the dry air. Dot as they entered the perimeter of the camp. Life seemed to pause, then swell forward. People stopped their tasks and turned. Dozens of eyes settled on her. She felt her face grow hot, a familiar dread coiling in her stomach. This was the moment she had feared, the judgment of an entire village. She braced for the stares of disgust, the pointing fingers, the laughter at the large, pale woman in the filthy, torn silk dress being dragged in like strange cargo. But the stares were different. They were curious, yes, intense and appraising. But she saw no mockery. The women, their faces strong and lined from the sun, looked at her with a practical, measuring gaze. They looked at her hands, her hair, the ruined dress, and then at Kayeshji. Their expressions were unreadable, but not cruel. Kayeshji brought the horse to a stop near one of the larger wickiups. An older woman stood there, her back straight as a pine, her gray hair in a long braid. Her eyes were the same dark, flint-like color as his. This was his mother. He spoke to her in low, flowing tones, his hands moving subtly as he explained. The woman's eyes never left Maria Louisa. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then his mother gave a single, slow nod. Kayeshji turned and walked to the travois. For the first time, he reached out his hand. It was not a gentle offer, but a firm, expectant one. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet. Her legs, stiff from days of riding and lying still, almost buckled. He steadied her, his grip strong and impersonal, then released her. He gestured toward his mother. The older woman approached. She circled Maria Louisa slowly, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She reached out and pinched the fabric of the silk dress between her fingers, feeling its strange texture, then made a soft TSK sound, as if to say, useless. She looked at Maria Louisa's soft, uncalloused hands and nodded to herself, as if confirming a thought. Then she did something unexpected. She placed her own hand on Maria Louisa's arm, not gently, but with a solid, assessing pressure, feeling the muscle and flesh beneath. It was the way one might examine a horse. Finally, she looked Maria Louisa in the eye and spoke a few words. Her voice was rough, but not unkind. Maria Louisa understood nothing. She simply stood, exhausted and terrified. The woman seemed to realize this. She turned and barked an order to a younger girl who was peeking from behind a wickiup. The girl scurried off and returned with a bundle. Dot. It was clothing. Soft, tan buckskin, fringed at the seams. The older woman took it and thrust it into Maria Louisa's arms. She then pointed firmly to a small, screened-off area behind the wickiup, where a water jar stood. Her meaning was unmistakable. Go, wash, change. Alone behind the screen, Maria Louisa struggled out of the ruined silk. It felt like shedding a dead skin, the skin of her old life. The buckskin clothes were simple, a long dress and leggings. She had to work to get them on. They were made for a smaller, leaner frame. They pulled tight across her hips and chest, the seams straining. A wave of the old shame hit her. Even here, she did not fit. But when she stepped out, holding the torn blue silk in her hands, the reaction was not what she expected. Kayeshji's mother looked her up and down. She did not frown at the tightness. Instead, she gave another nod, this one of approval. She stepped forward, took the silk dress from Maria Louisa's hands, and without a second glance, tossed it onto the cooking fire. It caught flame with a quick, bright flare, the fine fabric vanishing into smoke and ash. The message was clear, that life was over. The woman then pointed to a nearby log where a large, partially scraped deer hide was stretched. Beside it lay a scraping tool made of bone. She picked up the tool, demonstrated the scraping motion, a hard, downward push to remove the flesh and fat from the hide. Then she handed the tool to Maria Louisa and pointed to the hide. Maria Louisa's hands, used to holding books or embroidery hoops, were clumsy and weak. She pressed the tool against the hide and pushed. It barely made a mark. She tried again, putting her whole body into it. The tool slipped, and she nearly cut the hide. She heard a soft chuckle from a few women nearby who were watching. Her face burned. She looked at Kayeshji's mother, expecting scorn. The older woman's face showed no anger. She came over, stood behind Maria Louisa, and placed her own worn hands over hers. She guided her hands, showing her the angle, the right amount of pressure. She did it again and again, until Maria Louisa began to feel the rhythm. It was hard, grueling work. Her arms and back screamed in protest after only a few minutes. Sweat trickled down her temple, but she kept going. She scraped, and as she worked, something quiet happened. The women who had been watching gradually returned to their own tasks, grinding acorn meal on stone slabs, weaving baskets from reeds, tending the cooking pots. She was not the center of attention anymore. She was just another person working, struggling, but working. No one commented on her body, her slowness, her mistakes. They only cared about the work. Kayeshji watched from where he tended to his horse. He saw his mother teaching her. He saw the intense, frustrated focus on Maria Louisa's face as she grappled with the unfamiliar tool. He saw the moment her hands found a better rhythm, a small victory in the long afternoon. He saw the way the other women, after their initial curiosity, simply accepted her presence as part of the work circle. They did not love her. They did not even know her. But in this place, her value was not in how she looked, but in what she could learn to do. It was a hard value, earned by sweat and sore muscles, but it was real dot as the sun set, painting the cliffs in shades of orange and purple. Maria Louisa's hands were raw and blistered. The hide was only partially cleaned, but she had done it. She had worked. When she finally put the tool down, her whole body aching, Kayeshji's mother placed a bowl of stew in her hands. It was a simple act, but it felt like a seal of approval. She had contributed, and so she was fed dot sitting by the communal fire. Eating the rich, gamey stew, Maria Louisa looked around. She understood no words, but she understood the language of the camp. The shared labor, the quiet talk, the children being called to sleep. It was harsh, but it was honest. For the first time since the stable yard, the knot of terror in her stomach began to loosen, not because she was safe, but because she was, in some small, hard way, useful. She was no longer a noblewoman. She was not yet one of them. But she was simply a woman who scraped hides. And for now, that was enough. Time in the valley was not marked by clocks or church bells, but by the sun's journey and the slow change of tasks. The scraping of hides gave way to the rubbing of brains into the leather to soften it. The grinding of acorns was followed by the patient weaving of baskets. Maria Luisa's hands, once soft and pale, grew red, then calloused. They became capable hands. Her back, which had ached with every movement, grew stronger. She learned to carry water from the stream in clay pots balanced on her head, a skill that took many clumsy soaking attempts to master. The women would laugh when she spilled, but it was a laughter that included her, not against her. They would show her again. Kaeshji was often gone, hunting or scouting with the other men. But when he was in camp, he watched. He saw her stubbornness. He saw the way she would bite her lip in concentration as she tried to coil a basket, her large fingers surprisingly deft once they learned the motion. He saw her sharing food with the camp dogs, a small secret smile on her face. He saw her looking at the children with a quiet wonder. One afternoon, he returned from checking his snares to find her sitting with his mother and two other women. They were weaving. His mother was telling a story, her hands never stopping their work. She spoke of the time the trickster coyote stole the sun, and how the animals worked together to get it back. Maria Luisa was listening intently, her eyes on the old woman's face. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the rhythm, the rise and fall of the story. When his mother made a gesture for Coyote's silly walk, Maria Luisa let out a soft chuckle. It was a gentle, genuine sound. Kaeshji found he had stopped walking to listen to it. That evening, by the fire, he did not go to sit with the other men as usual. Instead, he walked over to where she sat, mending a pair of leggings. He sat down beside her, not too close. For a while, he said nothing, just watched the flames. Then he picked up a long, straight stick from the ground. He smoothed the dirt in front of them with his palm. He drew a simple shape in the dirt, a four-legged animal with antlers. He pointed to it, then to the mountains, and made a sign with his hands like running. "Jill," he said, his voice low. "Dear." She looked from the drawing to his face, understanding dawning. She nodded. "Sirvo," she said softly in Spanish. He repeated the Apache word, "Jill." She tried to say it, the sound strange on her tongue. He gave a slight nod. Then he drew another shape, a curved line for a body, a circle for a head, lines for legs. "A horse." "GV," he said. "Caballo," she replied dot, and so their true conversation began. It was a slow, patient language of dirt and gesture. He drew a stream, said the word. She said hers. He pointed to the fire, the sky, the moon. She taught him the Spanish words, and he taught her the Apache. They moved from nouns to actions. He pretended to drink, said the word. He pretended to eat. He pointed to her sewing and made a stitching motion. One day, he found her trying to explain something to his mother, frustrated by her lack of words. She was holding a basket and pointing to the different patterns. Kaeshji came over. He listened to her Spanish, then turned to his mother and translated the idea into a few short Apache phrases. His mother's eyes lit with understanding, and she launched into a detailed explanation of what the patterns meant. Maria Luisa looked at Kaeshji, her eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. He had not just given her words. He had built a bridge. The lessons moved beyond the dirt. He began to take her on short walks at the edge of the camp. He showed her how to spot the subtle trail of a rabbit, how to see the scratch marks of a squirrel on the bark. He taught her which plants could be used for tea, which ones for healing, which ones to avoid. He didn't treat her as if she were stupid for not knowing. He presented the knowledge as simple facts of the world, facts she now had a right to learn. One evening, as the purple twilight settled, they sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley. The cooking fires below were tiny glowing dots. He was quiet for a long time. Then he began to speak, not in single words, but in a slow, careful sentence. He told her, mixing Apache with the Spanish he now knew, that his people were of this land, but that the world was shrinking. He spoke of the Mexican soldiers, the American traders, the fences and farms creeping in. "I am a man between," he said, using his hands to show a space between two worlds. "My father's way is fading. The new way is a storm. It is. Lonely to stand in such a place." Maria Luisa listened. She heard not just the words, but the weight behind them. This fierce, competent man was telling her he was alone. She thought of her own loneliness in her father's house, a different kind, but just as deep. She searched for the words. "I understand lonely," she said slowly, in her broken mix of Spanish and the new Apache words. "In my father's house, I was a wrong thing in the wrong place." She gestured to her own body, a gesture that once meant shame, but now was just a statement of fact. "Here, I am just a person who is learning. It is better." He turned to look at her. The last of the light was in his eyes. He looked at her face, softened by the dusk. He looked at her strong, working hands resting in her lap. He looked at her, the whole of her. The silence between them was full, not empty. Slowly, he reached out. He did not touch her face or take her hand. He placed his fingertips very lightly on the sleeve of her buckskin dress over her forearm. It was a touch of pure connection, acknowledging her presence, her words, her being there with him on the rock. It was more intimate than a kiss. "Jiltso," he said, the word like a breath. She didn't know what it meant. She looked a question at him. He did not explain with words. He pointed to the distant mountains, dark against the night sky. "Jill," he said, mountain. Then he pointed to a small, pale flower growing stubbornly from a crack in the rock beside them. "So," he said, yellow. "Mountain flower. A thing of enduring strength and quiet beauty, growing where nothing should be able to grow." He looked from the flower back to her. In his eyes, she saw it all. She saw that he saw her not the noble woman, not the burden, but the resilient, learning, stubborn woman she had become. He saw the strength in her softness, the beauty in her perseverance. It was a look of complete and total acceptance. It was, without any grand declaration, the clearest look of love she had ever received. It asked for nothing. It simply saw, and in seeing, cherished. She did not look away. She let him see her tears, not of sadness, but of a relief so profound it washed through her like clean water. The last of the old shame, the ghost of her father's curse, finally dissolved in that quiet twilight gaze. She was Jiltso, and it was enough. It was more than enough. The seasons turned in the hidden valley. The scorching summer heat softened into the golden light of autumn, and the cottonwood trees by the stream blazed yellow. Maria Luisa was no longer the woman who arrived on a travois. She moved through the camp with a sense of belonging, her buckskin dress now warm and comfortable, moving with her body, not against it. She was Jiltso, and she was also the woman who made the tightest baskets, who had a gentle touch with the sick children, and whose stew was secretly favored by the elders for its subtle use of wild herbs. Her life with life. Kayeshji was built in quiet moments. A shared look across the fire, his hand briefly resting on her shoulder as he passed, the way he would always leave the tenderest piece of meat in her bowl. They had become partners, their bond woven into the daily fabric of survival and community. She learned his moods, his thoughtful silence before a long hunt, his quiet satisfaction when a task was done well. He learned hers her focus, when learning a new skill. The way she hummed old Spanish songs under her breath when she was content. The outside world, the world of haciendas and soldiers, felt like a distant dream. But the desert had a way of reminding you that no valley was truly hidden forever. The sign came first from the dogs. They set up a frantic barking one afternoon, not their usual yips at rabbits, but a deep, alarmed chorus. The men in camp immediately stopped their work. Hands went to knives and bows. Kayeshji moved to a high point, shading his eyes as he looked south, the direction of the old world. Soon, they all saw it, a slow plume of dust on the horizon. Riders, not many, but moving with purpose. As they drew closer, the glint of metal and the faded blue of Mexican cavalry uniforms became clear. A cold knot, one she hadn't felt in over a year, tightened in Maria Luisa's stomach. The soldiers rode into the outskirts of the camp, their horses skittish, their faces wary and proud. Their leader was a young captain, his uniform dusty but crisp. His eyes scanned the wickiups, the people who had gathered, silent and watchful. They settled on Maria Luisa, her height, her posture. The faint traces of her ancestry in her features marked her as different from the Apache women. Kayeshji stepped forward, placing himself slightly between the soldiers and the heart of the camp. He said nothing, his stance calm but unyielding. The captain cleared his throat. He spoke in formal Spanish, his voice carrying in the still air. "I am looking for a woman, a Christian woman taken from a hacienda to the south, the daughter of Don Villaserer. He has petitioned for her return." His eyes locked on Maria Luisa. "Are you she?" Every eye in the camp turned to her. The silence was heavy. She could feel Kayeshji's stillness beside her. She could feel the gaze of his mother, of the women she worked with, of the children who called her by name. She stepped forward, just one step, so she was level with Kayeshji. She looked at the captain. In her mind, she saw her father's study, the smell of brandy and contempt. She saw the cold stone of the chapel she never wanted. She felt the bite of the rope on her wrists. Then she saw the travois poles against the sunset. She felt the warmth of the buffalo hide. She heard the word Jilzo spoken in the twilight. She spoke, her Spanish still that of a noble woman, but her voice was now fuller, grounded by the desert air. "I am she." The captain's face relaxed into a look of relief and faint triumph. "Then you are rescued, Senorita. Gather your things. We will escort you back to your father's estate. You need not endure this primitive existence any longer." The word rescued hung in the air like a bad smell. Maria Luisa did not move. She looked past the captain, at the soldiers, at the road that led back to a life of silken prisons and whispered insults. Then she looked beside her, at Kayeshji. His face was a mask, but she saw the tiny pulse in his jaw. He was leaving the choice to her. It was the greatest respect he could give. She turned back to the captain. "You mistake the situation," she said, and her voice was clear and firm. "I was not taken. I was given away, thrown away, like garbage." She saw the captain flinch slightly. "These people," she said, gesturing to the camp, to the wickiups, to the watching faces, "they did not throw me away. They taught me. They gave me a place. This is my home." The captain stared, confused and growing impatient. "Senorita, be reasonable. This is no life for a woman of your standing." A small smile touched her lips. "My standing is here. I am the wife of Kayeshji. I am Jilzo. I am a woman who scrapes hides, weaves baskets, and tends to her people. There is nothing for me to go back to." She then did something that shocked the captain and his men. She turned to Kayeshji and spoke to him not in Spanish, but in the flowing, consonant-rich language of the Apache. She told him, "Tell them to leave." Tell them the woman they seek is not here. She is gone." Kayeshji looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw a deep, fierce pride that burned brighter than any fire. He turned to the captain and translated, his words short and final. Like the closing of a door, the captain argued, threatened vaguely about consequences, but the resolve he saw in the couple, and in the entire gathered band, was a wall he could not breach. Muttering about madness and savagery, he wheeled his horse around, and the soldiers followed, kicking up dust as they retreated the way they came. As the dust settled, the camp did not erupt in celebration. The tension simply melted away. Life resumed. The children went back to their games. The women returned to their work. It was as if a strange bird had flown through and then left. That night, by their fire, Kayeshji took her hands in his. He turned them over, looking at the palms, now strong and etched with the lines of her new life. He brought them to his lips, not in a grand gesture, but in a quiet, lasting kiss of gratitude and possession. Years later, a traveler, a lost ethnologist searching for stories, came upon an Apache band. He wrote in his journal of a curious sight, a woman of clear Mexican descent, her body ample and strong, moving through the camp with an air of quiet authority. She spoke to the elders with respect, directed the younger women in their work, and her laughter was a warm, common sound. Beside her was a warrior, his hair now streaked with gray, his eyes still sharp. The traveler noted how the warrior's gaze followed the woman, a look of unwavering devotion it was plain for anyone to see. When the traveler asked about her, he was told she was a healer, a wisdom keeper, a woman who had come from far away and chosen to stay. She was called Jiltso. They lived a life not of fairy tales, but of hard-won contentment. It was a life built not on the ruins of her past, but on the solid ground of mutual respect, forged in silence, nurtured by patience, and chosen freely under a wide, open sky. He loved her, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. And she, who had been given away as punishment, had found in his arms her greatest reward.